Hey everybody, I am the man that is the middle-aged nerd. Apologize for not making a video for a while. I've been busy. I wanted to talk a little bit about, again, I know I made a video earlier about this subject, but I want to talk some more about Vietnam. I, uh, I made a comment on somebody else's video about why I thought Vietnam was a win for the United States, and how for many years I've held that belief. And anytime I see a Vietnam veteran, when I'm out at Wally World or whatever, and I see some guy with a Vietnam veteran hat, I always try to, at the very least, stop, tell him hi, shake his hand, and thank him. And I had this guy made a comment on one of my respond to one of my comments and say, he appreciated my heart was in the right place, but said he was a vet. Hey, unless you were there, you don't know how horrible it was, and no, it was actually a loss for the United States. And I don't look. A lot of people look at Vietnam, America's involvement. You can talk about the shooting war of Vietnam from 65 to 73. You can talk about, you can say the Vietnam conflict went up to 75 when the North took the South and took Saigon, and could say it even started as early as 60 when Eisenhower sent advisors over there. But I look at the Vietnam War in a much bigger macro sense. I'm not really so much concerned with Lyndon Johnson and Robert McNamara being somewhat incompetent, though I do think they get not enough blame for how much bad they did, and I don't think Richard Nixon gets enough praise for how much good he did. I kind of look at the Vietnam War for the United States the same way I kind of look at the Persians, if from the perspective of the ancient Romans. After World War II, you had this. Oh, well, and to backtrack real quick, America is such a young country, if you think about it. Columbus only discovered the New World in 1492. The Mayflower only got to the United States, or the New World, and what was it, 1621. You had then you had in the 17th century the Dutch and the English vied, and the French vied for control of the continent. Then that remarkable day in 1776 when the United States as we know it today was actually founded. So we're talking about 249 years of actual history, which is really not a tremendous amount of historical space. But post World War II, you had this communist menace, and they were, the Chinese and the Russians had allied under this umbrella of communism, which that was a bad thing because Russians and Chinese historically have not liked each other and have not gotten along. And the Iron Curtain had descended over Eastern Europe, as Winston Churchill had talked about, and you had an issue of the Vietnamese and the, had kicked the French out in 1954, and really what it was communism was just spreading its influence. The smaller governments of like Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Myanmar, I guess, Burma, whatever, Korea, Singapore, freaking Japan, Indonesia, all those countries down there, they were really at threat of being taken over. Now, why was it important for us to go there and to do something and to pick a fight and make a stand somewhere? Well, I'll bring it to the Persian Roman analogy, which was the Romans lasted from 757 BC, the official foundation of the city of Rome, though there were people who lived in lived in the Roman area for several hundreds of years before, and really all you could say all the way until the fall of Constantinople in 1453. That's a run of over 2,200 years. And ever since about the the end of the Third Punic War, where the Romans really kind of made the Mediterranean Sea kind of a Roman lake, they had these Persians to the east. If you want to think about where the Persian Empire starts, think of where Greece and the Macedonian Peninsula over there. Think east of Constantinople, Asia Minor. We got Turkey. We got before they were Persians, they were called Parthians, down in kind of Saudi Arabia and further east. And the Persians, they never they never had the might of the Romans. They never had the wealth. They never had, the bureaucracy. But what they did have was, they really only had one natural enemy. They made money because people would travel, take the Silk Road, before it was the Silk Road, but people would travel from Asia to Africa, from Europe to Africa, from Africa to Asia, and from Russia down. So there was commerce with the Persians, and every so often they would go and pick a fight with the Romans. And now the Romans, by the time Octavian, or call him Augustus Caesar, if you will, by the time of his reign in the late 1st century BC and the early 1st century AD, ushers in what we call the Pax Romana, that the 2 century golden age. The Romans had pretty much mopped up, all of, think we're just going to call them in modern day country. They had taken England, France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, all of northern Africa, a good chunk of the Middle East, a lot of modern day Eastern Europe. They were up into Romania. They basically, everything in modern day Western Europe they didn't have was Germany, and which were the Huns in those days, or you could call them the Teutons, or just the Germanics. And they didn't have Britain and Ireland north of Hadrian's Wall. And what the Romans had surmised was the Germans had had licked them pretty good in 9 AD in the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, but the Romans had kind of settled for, what, it's better to trade with them and have a good defensive posturing, and we can counterattack if they mess with us, so we shouldn't have problems with them. And for many years, they didn't have problems. And when they got to thinking about trying to take all the British Isles, they got to the point where they kind of stretched themselves so thin, and the idea of taking Scotland and Ireland, there wasn't a lot of civilization, there wasn't a lot of development, there wasn't really anything in it for them. So they built Hadrian's Wall, and as they were trying to kind of solidify and create some sort of a border, they had these damn Persians that every so often would come pick a fight. And the Romans would have to move their armies from the west to the eastern frontier, and generally they would beat the Persians. 9 times out of 10, they would generally whip the Persians in 1 or 2 big battles, and then typically what they would do to get the Persians to go away would basically just, they'd give them some money and say, hey, get out of here, quit bothering us. The Persians were a little bit of a different type of government. The people who would fight in the Persian armies were oftentimes slaves. They were conscripts. They were, kind of arrow fodder. They were a lot of mercenaries. The Persians, and they typically had a type of theocracy, or a monarchy, where they had their religion, like there's Zoroastrianism before it was Islam. That was kind of their religion. And think of the movie 300, that Zack Snyder movie about the Battle of Thermopylae. While it is it's kind of it's definitely much more fantasized. The meat and potatoes were there. The Romans were, for the most part, free men and women. They had even when the Republic changed to an imperialism, The average, Roman citizen had many more, and men and women had rights, they had freedoms, they could vote. Uh, there was much more of a sense of Romans being kind of up here, and everybody else who was not Roman was therefore uncivilized. But they had these Persians who every so often would come and would pick a fight. And if the Romans did not answer, it would be catastrophic. And there were times they called this, there was something known as the crisis of the third century in the late 200s AD. And this happened again in the late fourth century, in the late 300s. There was a period of a couple of decades in the late third and fourth century. The Persians picked fights with the Romans, and the Romans didn't do a very good job. There was Please, you'll have to forgive me if I'm massacring some of the dates. I know you guys are all probably Googling dates and everything. There was a couple of instances where Roman emperors were captured and ransomed or just straight up killed, which wasn't a good look. But the thing is, the Romans never had as much power as they did have, as much sophistication, as much technology, as much as their military and economic might was. They never had the power to just absorb or wipe the Persians off the face of the planet. So they kind of had to do what we had to do to the communists in North Vietnam in the 60s and the 70s, which was we had to fight them. Now, I like to think that the United States of America is a pretty powerful country, and we are. We ever since really World War I, we have established ourselves as the supreme military force in the world that just cannot be touched. And, second place is very, 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 very far away. But in 1965, we did not have enough men, enough reason. If we had had if we had had a 2025 military, I don't think we could have taken all of China and all of the Soviet Union and held it in 1965. Too much damn real estate. Just too much real estate. So what do you do in a situation like that? You have to fight. And it was tough. And I know, gosh dang it, the guys, the boys and girls who fought in Vietnam for the side of freedom, it may have seemed like what you were doing was pointless and dumb, and you shouldn't have been there. But if we had not fought in Vietnam, if we had not killed upwards of 2+ million Vietnamese combatants and untold numbers of civilians, if we had not dropped, I think I saw a statistic one time that said we dropped like 2 or 3 times the amount of ordnance, bombs, and artillery shells and things of this nature on North Vietnam, that was all dropped in World War II, all the bombs and everything that were dropped in World War II. Communists, they don't have unlimited resources. The Vietnam War was very much a proxy war. It was fought with Soviet money and Chinese money, and it was Chinese soldiers, and it was North Vietnamese soldiers, and it was U.S. soldiers, and it was costly. For every American soldier that was wounded or killed, we killed or wounded 25 of theirs. They did eventually, when Richard Nixon in May and December of 1972, a lot of people may remember, Nixon had said, "I've had enough of this. This war has gone on too long. It is time to frickin' put an end to it." He goes on a crazy bombing campaign and absolutely he goes and he bombs Laos and Cambodia. The guy just scorches the earth over there. And he almost got him to the negotiating table after the May bombing campaign in 1972. Well, after he wins re-election in historic fashion in November of 72 against McGovern, the Chi Coms and the Vietnamese, they still didn't want to go to the negotiating table. So Merry effing Christmas, Nixon decides to just bomb the hell out of the whole region again. That's when you finally get the peace treaty, or at the very least the armistice, is signed in January of 1973. That was a win for the United States. More so, if we had not fought in Vietnam, we would have never been able to break up the partnership of the Soviets and the Chinese by starting a trade relationship with China. Now, a lot of people think it's a bad thing that we do business with China. A lot of my grandparents, God rest their soul, they would go to Walmart and they would see something that was made in China and they would get all mad. But this world, mankind, civilization itself has always been built on trade. All right? We have to have trade with our partners. When we doing business with the Chinese is a heck of a lot better than doing war with them. All right? Because if they're making money, if we're making money, nobody wants a war. Nixon got the Chinese to the negotiating table. He opened up trade with them, and that was 1973. Okay, now a mere 18 years later, after the Chernobyl disaster and the Berlin Wall falling, the Soviet Union collapses. Bang. Communism dead. That is because now a lot of people can say, well, communism would have imploded over under its own weight. Maybe. But how many decades and centuries would that have taken? You know, Stalin was able to keep communism going for many decades, and he was a brutal son of a gun. He, for as much as death and destruction and evil that the people like to, glob on to Adolf Hitler, old freaking that Austrian painter doesn't hold a candle to Joseph Stalin. But we're getting far afield here. We fought Vietnam, and as a result, it wasn't overnight. It wasn't overnight, but communism was destroyed. And now we see with this recent debacle between the Ukrainians and the Ruskies that the Russians are indeed a paper tiger. The Chinese don't have the military might that they had been projecting for all these years. This is all an outcome of the brave men and women who fought, and many of them were wounded, and many of them died in Vietnam. And it breaks my heart that so many veterans were spat upon by filthy America-hating hippies. It breaks my heart that to this day, the victors of Vietnam, our boys, have never gotten a proper parade or a proper thank you from the government of the United States. But and even it breaks and even the bigger tragedy is all of these veterans who really don't know the history of what they were even involved in and don't understand the bigger context of what they did. And they are winners. Now it's not winning in the conventional sense of we invade your country and we take it now. We didn't do that with the Germans and the Italians and the Japanese after World War II. Yeah, we still have some military bases there, but we didn't conquer them. We liberated them from Japanese imperialism and the fascists in the West. I wish I could shake the hand and give a hug to every Vietnam veteran and apologize for how the left-wing media and our government and the populace has lied to you. You are not losers. You are winners. and I know it was hard. I'm not a veteran. I'm not a Vietnam. I'm 42. I'm not a Vietnam veteran myself. But by God, if the Romans had just let the Persians go unchecked and do what they wanted to, they would have been at the walls of Rome well before the Visigoths ever were in 476. Vietnam is a win. Without them, the communism would have spread. It would have taken South Korea. It would have taken Japan. It would have taken Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia. And what happens when it threatens Australia? At what point do we cede Australia and New Zealand to? Because, well, it's that half of the globe. We're gonna cut. We're gonna say, okay, Eastern Hemisphere is communism. Western Hemisphere is freedom. They wouldn't have stopped if we had not stopped them. They're bullies. All right, Ho Chi Minh, Chairman Mao, Stalin. They're bullies, and they had to be stopped. No, I don't like that son of a bitch, Lyndon Johnson. But a broken clock is still right twice a day. Lyndon Johnson was right to send boys to Vietnam. Could it have been done better? Wars, it's Monday morning quarterback, and you see all your mistakes, don't you? It's real easy to see what you did wrong. But Nixon had the intelligence and the testicular fortitude that the media made Johnson out to have. Nixon won that war. And the liberals, the anti-establishment, America-hating professors and media lights and the Democrats, they hated him because he was so popular, because he was Trump in a lot of ways is a modern-day Richard Nixon. Just a guy who goes out and says he's going to do something, and then he does it because he loves America. Richard Nixon didn't profit from being president. I mean, well, he had a salary, but Richard Nixon didn't die a multi-gazillionaire the way the Clintons are going to, or the Obamas are going to. Gosh, if we had lost Japan to communism, South Korea, okay, how much technology how much Japanese culture do we use and take for granted on a daily basis? The Koreans, my goodness. I'm a big fan of StarCraft Brood War. I follow the pro scene. Esports is South Korea is like they're kind of like the first country to have esports as a big thing. Japan. If we had lost Japan, my goodness. No Nintendo, no Sega, no Xbox. Well, I guess Xbox is American. PlayStation, I meant to say. No Sony, no Toyotas, no Hondas, no Nissans, no Mitsubishis, no televisions. Crud almighty. We would still be, technologically, with electronics, we would still be living 30 years ago if we had lost the Japanese to communism. And if you're a Christian, as I am, you want as many people in the world to live with freedom as possible. Christ didn't, well, we're getting far afield. I just wanted to say Vietnam was a win. Vietnam veterans are winners.